channel for our President's Day special Q&A, Ask Me Anything, where for the next hour I will be taking all of your questions related to history and social studies and answering them in a friendly neighborhood manner. And that's what we do here at the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. We talk about history in a friendly and neighborly way, and we try to get you introduced to different historical topics and things you may not know. That's why I have an entire short series where I talk about, did you know? Like, did you know about this or did you know about that? I talk about historical myths. I'm currently doing a series on Chinese imperial dynasties. I've kind of been delayed due to some personal issues, just like a lot of our live streams were delayed this weekend. This weekend was technically supposed to be our birthday, the first anniversary of the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, which started on the Sunday of President's Day. So that's when we celebrate. We had a live stream yesterday for that. But next weekend there will be some special live streams and content coming out for the channel to celebrate our year anniversary, as it was about February 21st, 22nd, 2024 that I got this off the ground, and it has been an amazing ride, and we've been really growing and doing a lot of great stuff, and I really, really appreciate that. And my wonderful moderator, M, showed up early today to put the different social media handles in the platform. So if you want to read my articles, you can go to Substack. If you want bonus content and you want to join up and donate and help the channel grow and expand, Patreon has exclusive content and early releases, such as my President's Day video, which was uploaded there ahead of my the one coming out today at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. You also have my X, Instagram, Facebook, all of those handles there. And if you want to actually ask me questions or go into deeper inquiries, you can always email me at friendlyneighborhoodhistory1@gmail.com. So we will be bringing you a Q&A for the next hour or so, but join us next weekend, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Fridays, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Saturdays for our Q&A Ask Me Anythings. Friday's session will be a makeup from this weekend and will last 2 hours long. And yep, we're going to be learning and talking about some history, as my wonderful moderator Matt has done. So make sure to show some love to him and M in the chat, as they have helped the channel along with a great deal, putting the social media handles in there, reminding everybody to like and subscribe. And yes, if you like and enjoy history and you enjoy learning about different types of history, then you are in the right place. So consider liking and subscribing and all of that good stuff. And Matt, am I coming in clear? Do I sound good? I'm pinning my microphone to my smoking jacket and hoping that I don't have to hold it and move it around during the live stream, so I can gesticulate with my hands a little bit. And yes, that is an actual word. It means to motion and move. So I'm going to take a little sip of water, but if you like history, if you like asking questions about history, then you are in the right place. Consider liking and subscribing and dropping a comment or topic you would like to discuss in the chat. It really helps the channel grow. So let's see here. You're welcome, Double A. My pleasure. I don't know why you're yelling at me using all caps, but yeah, hopefully my voice is coming in clear and you can hear me all right with the new microphone and everything. But welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel for our Q&A. Ask me anything related to history and social studies. Hey, Ava. Hey, Noel. Great to see you. Thank you for joining us. Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, where I answer all of your questions related to social studies, social sciences, and the humanities. Thomas, welcome from Germany. Great to see you. We have people who join us all over the world, and I really appreciate that. Yeah, Germany, obviously an amazing country with a very rich history. So I do talk a lot about Germany on the channel and its history and things along those natures. So if you like learning about that history, you are in the right place. And I will be answering any questions, comments, or topics you have regarding to social studies for the next hour or so. We do this every Friday and Saturday night on the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. Then on Sundays, we have a live stream lecture about different historical topics. And join us as we celebrate our year anniversary next Friday with a 2-hour live stream Q&A, Ask Me Anything, that will last from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Ava, it's very hot in California. Yeah, I can understand. There's a lot going on in California and all around the world. So I definitely think so, Thomas. But yeah. So if you have questions, comments, topics related to history and social studies, you're in the right place, and I'm here to answer all of them for the next hour or so. And happy President's Day to all of you. Today is a 3-day holiday here in the United States where people celebrate the different American presidents, and I have a video coming out about that at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, so please check that out. I've done a couple of shorts about it. I have an entire series on the U.S. presidents and things going on there, so if you like learning about U.S. history and the presidents, you're in the right place. and it's a good day to do history because it's President's Day, and it was President's Day weekend last year where I got this channel started, and I've been doing. Hello, Kevin. Love that you come here. Love what you do. Coming here, liking, subscribing, all this stuff. Um, the country is built of lies. It's hard to say. What do you mean? Sohan, hello from Iran. Thank you for joining us from Iran. I love having people from all over the world here. We have people from Persia and India who ask me about their history, and we have people from the Middle East. We have people from Finland and Russia, and it's always so great to see people come in and say, "Do you know any history about my country?" And I'm just always, it's always a pleasure to share about it. Um, yeah, CX, I don't remember that. You must be thinking of somebody else in a smoking jacket who has a history channel. And make sure to follow the social media handles that my wonderful moderator, Matt, is putting in the chat. Matt has been here a very long time. Sobhan, you also have a good culture. Thomas, everything is a big, wide-ranging tent. Do you have anything in particular you want to talk about? And if you like learning about lies, sweet little lies, then you're in the right place because I do a series about historical myths where I do some myth busting about different historical things that weren't actually true. Ava, I'm so sorry to hear about your grandma's house, if that's actually true. Yeah, there was like thousands of fires in California are just a natural thing, but this was like the biggest fire in like LA city history and LA County history, so it was really crazy. Oh, CX, well, I'm glad you're subscribing. Make sure to like the live stream and all of that great stuff. Yeah, fire is a huge part of California. It's a high desert kind of area. There's definitely a dry heat and a lot of underbrush and stuff like that. So wildfires, droughts, those have been a big part of the history of the westernmost state in California in the United States. So yeah, but if you have questions and topics related to history and social studies and the humanities that you would like to discuss, please drop them in the chat and I'll be happy to answer them in a timely manner. We'll be bringing you some friendly neighborhood history for the next hour or so, answering any of your questions related to history and social studies. And I'm trying something new. Instead of holding my microphone, I've got it clipped to my smoking jacket. Yes, it's my Hugh Hefner jacket. I get that. We are also the History Playboy channel, so there's a lot of stuff there too. But hopefully you can all hear me okay. Am I coming in clear? Is it too loud? Is the audio bad? Just want to make sure that everybody's hearing me all right before we proceed. I'm going to take another sip of water. It's hot where I am too. So, and there's also, by the way, we've got social media. We've got Instagram, we've got Facebook, we've got X, where I do extra content and bonus stuff and do posts and reflections and things like that. We've also got Patreon, where there is more exclusive content and early releases. So check that out. And for small nominal fees, you can become a friendly neighborhood historian or a best friend historian. And there's a lot of extra stuff there that you can check out and hopefully really, really enjoy. What else do we have? We've got a Substack where I write articles about different historical topics, try to post there every other day. So if you want early content, if you want to read my stuff, Patreon and Substack in that order, respectfully, all of that good stuff. Yep. So for the next hour or so, we'll be talking about history, social studies, answering your questions about any of those topics. So please consider liking and subscribing, all that great stuff. From Connecticut, Julio, welcome to the channel. Glad you're here. Connecticut was named, I believe, after a local native tribe that had named one of the rivers in the area the Connecticut. So Connecticut is obviously one of the earliest colonies in American history. It's one of the 13 original colonies, and it is the second New England colony after Massachusetts when the Pilgrims landed on Plymouth Rock in 1620, and then the Massachusetts Bay Colony of 1630. Connecticut was founded by Thomas Hooker in 1637, the second New England colony. So Julio, you're from a really beautiful place, wide open spaces in Connecticut, Madagascar, am I right? So. And you are joining us at an opportune time. This is the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel where I answer all of your questions related to history and social studies. And of course, also we do live streams and stuff like that. We have short form and long form content, and it's a great day to be doing history because not only is it a beautiful day, it's also a great day to wear a smoking jacket because they're a lot of fun. And it is President's Day, the day that Americans remember their presidents. President's Day is based on the celebration of the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln and George Washington, two of America's most well-known and popular and impactful presidents. both of whom were born in February. There were two other presidents born in February: William Henry Harrison, who was the shortest serving president, who died a month into his term, and of course Ronald Reagan, who is one of the most also well-known and popular presidents in American history. So it's a good day to do history because this is a very historical day for people in the United States and stuff like that. And of course, the United States has had an impact all over the world, both for good and for ill. And so it's had President's Day has some international impact as well as domestic for the Americans. And I try not to be specific about where I'm from or what I do. People don't even know my name, my backgrounds, a lot of that stuff. People know that I have a master's in history and I'm from the United States. And if you can pay attention to other details, you can figure out exactly where I'm from in the States, but people like to guess all the time. I usually release things and I post things and mention an Eastern Standard Time, so that might give you a hint. But yeah, we've been doing these live streams ever since May of last year. So the channel started February of last year with short and long form content, and eventually I decided that I wanted to do live streams where I answered questions and kind of gave back. Instead of just throwing information to people, I wanted to hear from the YouTube community and from people who enjoyed the channel and answer questions and queries related to history, social studies, and the like. And we started off with only one. Howdy, G, good to see you. Welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. So we would do a live stream Saturday afternoons, and it would just be me answering historical questions and stuff like that. And then eventually there was one time where it was going so well, we had a nice crowd there and they were all asking, can we come back and ask more questions tomorrow and something like that. And I didn't want to disappoint them. So we added in Sunday afternoons too. So I did Saturday and Sunday afternoon Q&As, Ask Me Anything about history and social studies, which is what we're doing right now. And then eventually, as a special for President's Day, 3-day weekend here in the United States. And then eventually we decided to do 3 live streams. We did Friday night Q&A. So start your weekend off right by getting all of your history questions and inklings answered from me, the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. And then keep that energy and positive vibes going on Saturday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, when you can ask more questions before you go out and party and do all of that stuff. You can ask me as many questions and bring up as many topics about history as you'd like. And G, if you love history, then you're in the right place. You are very much in the right place. And I mean, my sign off is always love history. So there's that too. Sunday. And then we decided that I had topics that I would always like to discuss and really enjoy talking about with people. So we decided to add a live stream on Sundays, and that became the live stream lecture. So that's 4 p.m. every Sunday, where we discuss a particular historical topic. So next weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, you'll have live streams. And as we celebrate our year anniversary, the live stream Q&A on Friday night at 8 p.m. will be 2 hours instead of 1 hour. So I will be answering your questions for 2 hours straight, going 2 rounds with all of you. And I'm really looking forward to all of that. If you like history and social studies, you're in the right place. Drop comments, topics, questions that you might have, and consider liking and subscribing and those social medias in the handle. So I'm still waiting for a couple of topics and stuff like that, but hopefully you guys can think of a few and we can have a really, really great live stream. So thank you for everybody who's liking and subscribing. There's also, of course, the Patreon and the Substack. There's Instagram, Facebook, and X, where you can follow me and get extra content, articles, and the like. So you don't have to donate. I'm not monetized yet, but I'm really just glad that everybody's here and that the support that we've gotten is amazing, and live streams have allowed us to reach people in ways that just putting out short and long form content was, and it has made me more of a community member here in YouTube and understanding the growth of that community. So yeah, this is the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel and our live stream Q&A. I will be going until about 4 p.m. Where did I travel? So I'm from America, so I've traveled in certain areas all across the United States. I haven't traveled much internationally, but I should definitely rectify that in the coming years. I'm a Russian historian, so I should definitely go to Russia and actually live there for a little while. I tend to specify in European history of the modern era, but my favorite type of history is definitely Russian history. So Eastern European and Russian history in the last few centuries is my specialty. My master's thesis was in the Great Game, the competition between Britain and Russia over South and Central Asia, and how Britain took over Afghanistan to keep the Russians from taking over it first. So yeah, I know a little bit about the Belarusian people. These areas were highly influenced by Russia and its foreign policy and its expansiveness throughout the last few centuries. So areas like Kaliningrad, Belarus, Ukraine, it's almost impossible to learn about their histories without learning about Russian history, and it's almost impossible to learn about Russian history without learning their histories. So obviously that's an extraordinarily big part of my knowledge and sphere. Of course, like any American, I start off with I do not speak any of the language. Um, if that's what you were asking, G, I'm not sure. But I do know a little bit about the history and society there. The Belarusians, I believe, if I'm correct, are what are called the White Russians, which are a different type of Russians, specific to more western parts of the Ural Mountains, so Ukraine and Belarus and stuff, and it's more European than necessarily Russian. There are different types of Russia. Russia is huge. So because Russia is huge, you have very different people from very different backgrounds. You have large substratas of Turks, Muslims. You have huge numbers of Slavs and Finns and Scandinavians and stuff like that. So yeah, Texas Repo, great to see you. Texas Repo is a friendly neighborhood historian. He's got a great question. Why did the Soviets invade Afghanistan? Speaking of Russia and Eastern Europe, and of course the Cold War, which is an extremely important part, not only did the British invade Afghanistan, but a century later, the Russians made the same mistake of messing with the Afghanis. In 1979, under Leonid Brezhnev, one of the most aggressive Soviet premiers, the Soviet Union occupied Afghanistan and fought a war there for 10 years. And the United States funded Islamic militants who were rebelling against the Soviets, including the Mujahideen, led by a young man named Osama bin Laden. Interestingly enough, before Osama bin Laden tried to destroy the United States helped him overthrow the Soviet yoke because it was the Cold War, and hurting the Soviets was a huge part of the Reagan administration in the 1980s. The Soviets invaded Afghanistan because there were rebellions and uprisings against a nominally communist government that had already been set up there that was very friendly to the Soviet Union. So in order to prop up that socialist government, the Soviets invaded. Afghanistan is a very tribal country. It's an incredible country, and it's a liminal country between the Middle East and Asia, and has always been basically uncolonizable, if that's even a word. It's been unconquerable. The Greeks, the British, the Russians, and the Americans have all gone in there for different reasons and never been able to overwhelm it. And the Soviets going in there didn't get anywhere. So that led obviously to the Soviet Union's of the Olympics in 1980 that were being held in Moscow, which basically allowed the Soviet Union to win all of the gold medals. But it was okay because they boycotted the US in 1984 in LA, and the US won all the medals then. So, yeah, the so the truth of the matter is the Soviet Union really struggled in that war because Afghanistan has really rocky and mountainous terrain, and there was a lot of guerrilla warfare aspects that the Soviets could not actually withstand. And the U.S. was helping the Islamic rebels, who eventually forced the Soviets out of their country in 1989 and set up an Islamic State that eventually became dominated by the Taliban in the 1990s. And obviously, the Taliban has been on and off in control of that region for the last 30 years. So so the Soviets went in there to prop up a Soviet style satellite socialist state that was very similar and friendly to them, and it ended up backfiring. And then many people have compared it to their Vietnam, where they went in to prop up a government they wanted, and that government ended up collapsing and embarrassing them internationally. But more than Vietnam, it showed the weaknesses of the Soviet system, whereas Vietnam only showed the weaknesses in American foreign policy in the late 1960s and 70s. So yeah, really interesting stuff. So Texas, great question. I hopefully gave a great answer. And if you are enjoying this, consider liking and subscribing. We've got some amazing friendly neighborhood historians here. G, one of our newest ones, Texas Repo, Fidel Torres. Becoming a friendly neighborhood historian is as easy as liking and subscribing. And the presidents are all friendly neighborhood historians, so you might as well be too. Fidel on this President's Day. So Fidel Torres, great to see you. Do you consider the Holy Bible as a form of a history book? Yes, I do. Not every book in the Bible is historical, but the books, like some of the books like Judges, 1st, 2nd Samuel, those things are supposed to be historical accounts. And the New Testament accounts, particularly the Gospels and the book of the Acts of the Apostles, are intended to be biographies and historical accounts. Now, they, of course, include many mythical and religious and spiritual messages and ideas and events in them, miracles and the like. and those aren't necessarily considered historical. But if you read any ancient text that is a history of a religion or a group of people, they include intervention from divine beings. Thucydides and Herodotus, the Greek historians, had the Greek gods showing up and helping out different Greek forces at different times in their history. So it shouldn't be any different for the Christian or Jewish God to do the same thing in the Tanakh, the Old Testament, and then again in the New Testament. So I do consider the Bible a book of history, but it is not only a book of history, and it's a collection. It's a collection of different books, dozens of books, in fact. Um, yes, Minsk, and Moscow, so many great cities in Russia. When you have such a huge country, you have an expansive amount of cities and different areas. The original one being, of course, Kiev, which is now Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine. So many people believe in Ukraine, with many reasons historically to believe this, that Russia, in fact, comes from Ukraine. The Russian attitude, especially that of Vladimir Putin right now, currently, is that because Kiev and that area is the original origin of the Russian people, Ukraine is part of Russia and belongs to Russia because Russia is a lot bigger, so that's okay for them to do that. Very interesting stuff. Sankey Oiki, okay, you need a pipe. It'll go so great with your outfit. I do use a pipe sometimes in my new studio. I'm not smoking as of yet, but I do smoke a pipe, and I have done that on the channel sometimes, and there's videos of me doing that here and on Patreon, stuff like that. Rodolfo, my wonderful moderator, is here. Matt's my wonderful moderator. Make sure to show them some love. Yeah. Sankyoki, who's the most underrated figure in history according to you, the most people don't know about? Oh, wow. Shah Jahan would be my knee-jerk reaction, because Shah Jahan was originally the Mughal emperor who built, most of the Mughal emperors, most Eastern history, especially to Western people, is not as well known as it should be. So Babur, Akbar the Great, and Shah Jahan, these amazing emperors of India in the 16th and 17th centuries, are extremely underrated. And one of the best examples of this is obviously Shah Jahan, who built the Taj Mahal as a tomb for his wife, in the Muslim style with the minarets and the domes and the stuff and the things like that. Yeah. Thank you, Texas. I did my best to give a good explanation about the Soviet Union and stuff like that, and that's what we do here at the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. Sankey's asking, who's the most underrated figure in history according to you? I already answered that. Yep, I try to know as much as I possibly can, but I'm always learning, always doing all that good stuff. Rishi, great to see you. Do you think religions are written by human for the higher being who is helping them? Yeah, I think there is a level in a lot of religious lore, be it polytheistic or monotheistic, and especially with mythical religions like the ancient pagan religions of the Greeks and the Romans and the Norse and the Egyptians, where there is a level of the gods are being formed and understood to help humans live and exist, and to explain the way human beings interact and what happens to them. And these are called ideologies. They are stories and mythologies that describe certain events so that people will understand why the world is the way it is. There's many of these examples, such as Persephone, the wife of Hades, who half the year spends her time in the underworld with Hades, and she was bright and beautiful and light, and she brings bright and beauty and light and verdure to the world. And when she's not around, the world goes into darkness and cold, and that is winter. And when she comes back, that is spring. And that's how the ancient Greeks understood the season change. It was based on when Persephone was forced to be with the god of the underworld, Hades. The Bible itself, was just talking about this, has ideologies. Why does water fall down from the sky, and how does that help us with our crops? Well, let me tell you a story. Human beings were so rebellious to God that he decided one day to destroy them with a flood, and now that's why rain is happening. They didn't understand the series of evaporation or seasonal changes, or the water cycle for that matter, so they developed these ideas over time. And that eventually led to these ideologies led to a cultural understanding of these religious stories. The interesting thing about the biblical stories is that for the most part, and this is the same, and you could say that for the Judeo-Christian, Islamic, monotheistic religions, most people still believe that these things, who are adherents to that religion, believe that these things actually happened. The Garden of Eden, Noah's Ark. There's many Christians who don't believe it, and then of course many secular people obviously don't believe it at all. But there's a large section of that religion, of those people still practicing that religion today, who still believe that those things aren't just mythical ideologies, but actually real life historical events that come combined with an ideology. So I think Rishi, a lot of religions are human beings trying to create their own gods and their own ideas of God. And that's why many of the ancient mythological religions, the Greeks, the Romans, the Persians, the Mesopotamians, their gods are like superheroes. They aren't perfect, they aren't omniscient, they aren't omnipresent like a monotheistic God would be. They are actually fallible, they do horrible things to each other, and they are extraordinarily greedy and advantageous. They just happen to be very powerful. So Zeus, Hades, Marduk, Osiris, and Set, these gods are more like superhuman creatures or superhumanoid creatures who happen to be fallible, greedy, self-interested, and sometimes completely debauched. Happy Viking. So I talk about humanities. I talk about stuff like that a lot. I'm not particularly sharing a particular religious point of view. Just as a disclaimer, I talk about geopolitics, religion, and culture on this channel as a way to see it through a historical lens. If you want to get to be friends with history and go over to his house and have a root beer, you're going to have share that root beer with him and with culture and religion and other social studies. It's just all part of the human experience, and history is one of the is my favorite, but all those other ones are related to it. Um, Happy Viking, what's your thoughts on the Ukraine war? Also, did you know that you can join the Ukraine Foreign Legion through a channel on YouTube who is recruiting? I do not know that. That sounds very interesting. An expeditionary force, the UEF, the Ukrainian Expeditionary Force, just like the British and the French had their expeditionary forces in World War II, or as I like to call it, World War III. My thoughts on the Ukraine war, I don't think wars are good. I think they're part of human nature, and we will always have war. It's how we understand history, is partially how we understand the human condition and our experience as people on this planet. And the truth of the matter is that war is just part of that experience. And I think the Ukraine war is just Russia and Ukraine fighting this cultural battle over historical information. And I think the Russian attitude and ideas, highly informed by their history of invasions from people like the Poles and the Mongols, which is strange to consider because you look at the vastness of Russia, the largest country on earth. How did it get to be the largest country on earth? Well, by invading and seizing land so that it wouldn't be invaded. They needed their own land to be buffer zones for them, and they see Ukraine as a buffer zone from the West and from NATO, and they see Ukraine as part of Russia in many ways, and that's why Putin is going in there and doing his thing. I don't think the war will last much longer, and I don't think that either side will be fully happy with the outcome of it. Rodolfo, do you ever go out cruising the singles bars in your smoking jacket? Friendly. Well, I'm not the friendly historian. You're the friendly neighborhood historian. Anyone can be a friendly neighborhood historian if they like and subscribe. So good plug there, Rodolfo. But the truth of the matter is, no, I don't wear this that often. I mean, I'll wear it like on special occasions with like a white t-shirt underneath. If it's cold, I'll wear it. It's very leisurely. It's very enjoyable. It's heavy when it's warm, though. The truth of the matter is, I don't go to singles bars like this. I don't need to go to singles bars necessarily. No shade at anyone who does or might enjoy that. I mean, it'd be interesting. Maybe I should try it out sometime just to see the attention I would get. I don't necessarily think it would lead anywhere, but anyways. What god is the most terrifying? Well, if you read these annals, it's interesting because the Norse gods, there's many very frightening gods there. I mean, Thor is certainly very terrifying. If I had to pick one of the most intimidating gods, though, I would have to pick Set, the god of the desert. The Egyptians have a very interesting idea in how they shape their theology. Set is the god of the desert, and he is the evil god. And I believe he has the head of a jackal. And those things are all related to each other because the Egyptians view the desert as their enemy. They view the desert as dangerous. They view the natural world beyond the bosom of the Nile to be dangerous. And the 97% of that land in ancient Egypt was actually desert. It was the Nile that allowed them to have any form of life. Osiris, the god of the world, one of the head gods, or Amun-Ra, these gods are gods of the sun or of the Nile. And Osiris's lifeblood was supposed to be the Nile itself because, according to Egyptian lore, Set betrayed him, murdered him, and threw his body into the Nile. Yet his body was reborn, and he was, thanks to his son, Horus, the god of the sky, who sees everything, the Eye of Horus, which is on US money, by the way. And it was Set, who did all of these horrible, evil things and was eventually banished for doing so. And he is the god of the desert, and he is the skulking, betrayal god. If, as many people like to think that that's Hades in Greek mythology, it's actually not. Hades doesn't do anything in Greek mythology to undermine Zeus's authority. He is just managing the death and everything. Yeah. Yeah, Texas, that's exactly what's happening. There seems to be a compromise that's going to bring about the end of this war between the Ukrainians and the Russians, and I don't know what that's going to look like. Did Egyptian monotheism predate Judaism? Not necessarily. Akhenaten tries to basically force, in the New Kingdom, there's three different kingdoms in Egypt. There's the Old Kingdom, which was established by a man named Menes at probably 2750 BC or even before then. Um, the Egyptians have kind of always had this ruler, but Menes is the one who united the upper and lower Nile regions. And because of that, they made a crown for the pharaoh, and the crown the was two parted, because one part is the upper Nile and one part is the lower Nile, to represent his dominance over the entire region of ancient Egypt. There is a record, there is some evidence to suggest that there was a large number of Jewish people, the Hebrews, the Hebrews, which was an old term for slave, who lived in Egypt during a particular amount of time. Now, I'm not saying how historically accurate the book of Exodus is, but I am saying that there is evidence that of some sort of exodus and semi-independence from the Jews who left Egypt practicing monotheism, although they often syncretized that with the worship of local gods in the land of Canaan, in the Levant, and also Egyptian gods themselves. Akhenaten was not the first monotheist. He doesn't seem to have been the first monotheist. It's a cart and horse issue, because did the Egyptians and Akhenaten get that idea of a monotheistic god from the Jews, or did the Jews get the idea of it from the Egyptians? I don't remember exactly when Akhenaten was pharaoh. If I'm correct, it is after. Historically, the Exodus may have been. So I would say no. Structural Judaism wasn't fully going on until the 11th century BC, when they conquered the land of Canaan, established the Davidic kingdom, and built the temple under supposedly King Solomon. And then the codification of their religious texts, particularly the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, didn't come until the 6th century BC, while they were in captivity in Babylon. By the way, on this channel, I use BC and AD, not because I don't mind, I'm prejudiced. BCE and CE are perfectly capable terms to represent a more secularized, neutral approach to historical dating. The problem is that BCE and CE are still centered around about the same event, the birth of Jesus of Nazareth. So before Christ and Anno Domini are obviously very religious in nature and highlight the imperialism and influence of Western Europe and the Catholic Church. However, BCE and CE, while trying to secularize that, are still based on the same exact dates, the birth of Jesus Christ. So, and it's a long answer to a great question, a short but great question, Rodolfo. The Egyptian monotheism does not seem to predate Judaism, but obviously one may have influenced the other. I don't know when Akhenaten actually reigned. If the Hebrews were not living in that land anymore, then there really isn't any way, then it just happened to be a coincidental monotheism going on in Israel and a monotheism going on in Egypt in the New Kingdom. So yeah, I'd have to know exactly the dates of Akhenaten's reign, and obviously the dates of an exodus. The identity and possibility of an actual exodus has been kind of up for debate for a long time, because a lot of people don't know if there was an exodus, and people who believe that it happened in some way, shape, or form, with or without the biblical narrative, put it at different times. The 15th century BC usually being the earliest, the 13th century BC under Ramesses the Great being the latest example of that. So there are even hardcore Christians and Jews debate the date of the Exodus amongst Christian circles. So there's some interesting history there. But yes, I've heard that before. There's also interesting parallels between Horus, who was born of a virgin on supposedly December 25th, and Jesus Christ. So Rodolfo, who were the Samaritans? Sorry, I have too much religion. It's not religion, it's history. I mean, they're connected to each other, so I appreciate you asking all of this great stuff. And while I'm answering that, Matt G, my wonderful moderator, is putting the handles in the chat. Thank you, Matt, so much. Like and subscribe and grow the Friendly Neighborhood History channel and become a Friendly Neighborhood Historian. We have over 6,500 strong. The goal is 10,000 by the summer. We'll see if we can get there or not. But basically, the answer is, Rodolfo, that the Samaritans were a branch of Jews who lived in the central part of the Levant, who basically practiced a syncretic form of worship that wasn't fully monotheistic, believing in a spiritualized form of the worship of the god Jehovah without the use of the temple. So in Judaism, an integral part of the worship of God is first the tabernacle, as described in the books of Exodus and Leviticus, and then later the temple built supposedly under King Solomon. So for the Jews, the worship was supposed to be there. For the Samaritans, worship was perfectly okay wherever they were, and they offered sacrifices, and they syncretized um, different forms of religions from the local Canaanite areas. And unlike the Jews, who were not supposed to intermarry or do any of these things according to the Old Testament, the Samaritans intermarried and mixed with the non-Jewish cultures, the other Semitic groups around that area, the Canaanites, quite frequently. And there are actually some Samaritans who still exist today in the land of Israel, in the country of Israel today. And Jews had a very, very low view of Samaritans through the centuries. And that's why you obviously have the story of the Good Samaritan, where Jesus challenges the idea of religious superiority by the Jews, giving credence to the Samaritans as a possibly good group of people, trying to get people to basically judge on the content of the character rather than the color of their religious belief. It's a very MLK-like message. But Texas Repo, great question. What do you know about Greenland, and why hasn't the U.S. tried to acquire the land before? We have, actually, and I made a video about this. So Greenland obviously seems, I used to think it was part of Canada. I was surprised to find out that the Danish had it, but I found that out years ago. Obviously, studying geography is a huge part of studying history, and so a good geographical question like that deserves a good answer. Greenland was originally settled by the Norwegians. The Danish took it over from them in kind of a back and forth between different Scandinavian Vikinger or Viking groups that were trying to assert as much dominance and control as they could over their colonial regions, which included England for a time, Ireland, as well as Iceland and Greenland. Eventually, the Danish gained control of it, and during World War II, or as I like to call it, World War III, the Germans occupied Denmark, and the Americans, worried about the Germans using Greenland as an invasion zone for the United States, actually took over Greenland and occupied it during the war. After the war, President Harry Truman believed that Greenland would be an excellent base of operations and bunker against the Soviets should they use their northern Russian ports to try to dominate the Arctic Circle and attack the United States that way. He offered the Danes a sum of money, and they refused, and Greenland has been part of Denmark for the last 80 years without interruption. We'll see if that's changed. We don't know. It's not a highly populated area. It's obviously high in the Arctic Circle, so it's a kind of an ironic naming that it is Greenland when it is not very verdant. So, Texas, good question, and that's the answer. We'll see if President Trump can get anywhere there. His concern is Russians and Chinese in the Arctic Circle as well. So, and yep, Matt's putting in the Substack. So if you don't like the sound of my voice, but you like the information that I present to you, maybe you can read about some of that information in my Substack. I just released an article a couple days ago about the history of Valentine's Day. Check that out there. Rodolfo, why do you call it World War III? Yes, great question. I've did an entire live stream on this, but basically I think that there happen to be 3 world wars. So when the next world war breaks out, it'll be World War IV, if it breaks out. There's obviously World War II would be the Great War, 1914 to 1918, Kaiser Wilhelm, the Russian Empire collapsing, the Russian Revolution, the Ottoman Empire collapsing, the Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsing, all the trench warfare, all quiets on the Western Front, the United States getting involved at the end. That war is the Second World War. The Third World War is the one with the Nazis and the Japanese, although Japan was in World War II and World War III. Basically, I believe that World War I happened in the 1750s. In Europe, it was called the 7 Years' War. In America, it was called the French-Indian War. But basically, there was fighting between the Europeans and different European countries over their colonial lands in North America, India, and off the coast of Africa, as well as fighting on the European continent. Prussia and Great Britain allied to fight against Russia, France, and Austria. Frederick the Great, the warrior king of Prussia, well known for his military tactics and his ability to create extremely effective forms of drilling and military action, attacked Maria Theresa, who he believed was an illegitimate ruler of the Austrian throne. And she fought back with her ally, the Russian Empress Elizabeth, and the French joined their side with Louis XV, who basically spent his entire reign bankrupting France by paying for very, very expensive wars. The British got involved because they hated the French to help the Prussians. They had already been fighting because a couple years, the war starts in 1756, but a couple years before that, in 1754, Indian tribes, particularly the Huron, associating with their trading partners and allies, the French, attacked a group of soldiers led by General Samuel Braddock and a young American colonel named George Washington, who are traveling into the Ohio River Valley, which is now the Midwestern states of the U.S. And that leads to the French Indian War, where the British, their few Indian allies, and the American colonists fight for 9 years again. And we talked about this on the live stream yesterday, against the French, the French Canadians and their Indian allies, and eventually the French lose. And so do the Indians, and the British take over what is now the American Midwest. And Spain, actually, a lot of people are showing maps with this Gulf of America, Gulf of Mexico debate, are showing maps of the center of the country down to Louisiana being controlled by the Spanish at this time. The French controlled that, gave it to the Spanish, who gave it back to the French, who sold it to the Americans in 1803 under Napoleon. Meanwhile, there was fighting off the coast of Africa, naval fighting. There were these forts controlled by different countries where they basically traded for goods and slaves. And the French and the British were attacking each other's forts. And then there was fighting in India, where the British and French were not only fighting with themselves, but pinning local Indian rulers called Rajas, which were like princes, to fight against one another. And Britain was able to eventually defeat France there as well. And on the continent, because the Russians basically wussed out and dropped out of the war, Frederick was able to overwhelm the Austrians and the French. So basically, the French-Indian War, the 7 Years' War, for me, includes enough continents, enough technology, and enough devastation to be world war, and enough change to the world. It set up all the preconditions for the American and French revolutions. It saw Catherine the Great come to power in Russia, and it established Prussia as the premier German state. All of those reasons are why I call the 7 Years' War the First World War, the Great War, World War II, and World War II, World War III. So, yeah, I give a much longer and more detailed explanation and justification for it on my live stream from a couple Sundays ago, my live stream lecture, which we have every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern, along with the 2 Q&As. This Friday will be a special one to celebrate the birthday of the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. We're turning one this year. I know I look a lot older than that, but we're turning one next Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll be going for 2 hours. Then we're going to do a Saturday early afternoon special where I will be answering your questions, but much earlier in the day on Saturday. And then Sunday, I will do my regular live stream lecture at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a topic you would like me to talk about historically for half an hour or an hour, consider dropping it there or emailing me. Matt, can we get the email in the chat, please? That will really help. Rishi, I heard even today people use cats, dogs, cows for economic benefits in Asia. Yes, they definitely do. I mean, cows will always have economic advantages because of milk and dairy products and things like that. Cats obviously have had a huge role in history. You go back to the ancient Egyptians and they found them to be sacred. Some of their most powerful gods were actually cats. T-Love, could you discuss the American-Cuban-Russian relationship? Okay, very good question. And this would bring me back to talking about the Cold War, which I've done a lot on this channel. Basically, Cuba had been owned by the Spanish until the late 1890s, when the United States fought a war called the Spanish-American War, very clever naming. And they took over Cuba and basically controlled its foreign policy for a while. And it developed this post-colonial relationship after they gave Cuba its full independence in 1903. Cuba struggled with economic development, but its main ally was the United States, who really was interested in tobacco, sugar, all of the things the Spanish had been exploiting the Cubans for, the Americans were now trading with for. And for a long time, the Cubans and Americans developed this relationship. However, the Cuban government tended to be very totalitarian and authoritarian and repressive of its people. Revolutionary movements sprouted up in Cuba throughout the 1930s and 40s, and eventually communism, the ideals of communism were proliferated there, and Fidel Castro became the leading communist there in the 1950s. He had actually been a murderer who embraced communist ideas and was eventually was kicked out of the country on several occasions, and was able to lead a small group of basically rebel bandits to eventually have a coup of Fulgencio Batista, who was the dictator of Cuba during the 1950s. So in 1958, 1959, Castro was able to lead a successful revolution against Batista and overthrow the American-friendly Cuban government and establish a communist government which terrifies the Americans because it's less than 100 miles away from the coast of Florida. They immediately become friends with the Soviet Union and Nikita Khrushchev, who immediately began funneling aid into Cuba. Cuba's economic and social system only survives is only buoyed. There's a large exodus of businessmen, artisans, and the upper classes, which really deprive Cuba of a lot of its economic potential. And um, obviously, there's confiscation of land. There's the demonization of small business and capitalist endeavors. So Cuba's economy struggles mightily throughout the 1960s and 70s, with the Soviet Union being the only ally to boost it up. Afterwards, after the fall of the Soviet Union, Fidel Castro, despite keeping a very repressive cultural government, starts to basically loosen the economic screws he had put on his own people for a long time. Um, so basically, the Soviets do everything they can to prop up the Cubans. They like that they have a satellite state right next to the U.S., and they think that they can get Castro to do whatever they want. Just like Mao Zedong, Castro will eventually develop his own independent theories and kind of not be as close to the Soviet Union in the 1970s and 80s. However, at that time, he is completely reliant on the Soviet Union to allow his communist experiment in Cuba to flourish and expand. Basically, the Soviets send them a bunch of aids and weapons, and this frightens the Americans. And many of the Cuban, upper class Cubans and capitalist Cubans and pro American Cubans who are forced to flee in the late 50s and early 60s try to convince the American military, the CIA, and Dwight Eisenhower, the US president, to invade Cuba and liberate it from the communists. Liberating quotation marks. I mean, these same people were kind of oppressing and exploiting the people of Cuba for a long time. So there's a lot of question marks about who really was oppressing. Maybe it's both sides are exploiting the common man, the common hombre of Cuba. However, eventually there is a campaign and a military operation called the Bay of Cochinos, the Bayo de Cochinos, or the Bay of Pigs, where the Americans promised some military and air relief and support to Cuban revolutionaries who want to basically start a counter-revolution and overthrow the Castro regime. This doesn't work because basically the US worried about Soviet intervention, pull back air support, and realized that the rebels really don't have a chance of overthrowing Castro, who is very much entrenched. The Bayo de Cochinos is a huge embarrassment to the Americans. It's a big, big win for communist Cuba, and it makes Nikita Khrushchev feel that President John F. Kennedy is a weakling and that he can basically manipulate him any way he wants. They've also built the Berlin Wall at this time, so Soviet-American relations are at an all-time low. The Cubans are very suspicious. There's a fear of communism spreading to the rest of Latin America. Castro sends his associate Che Guevara, who he will later betray, to different Latin American countries and Caribbean countries to basically spread communism as much as possible. And with the blessing and the help of the Soviet Union, Cuba will continue to be involved in communist activities in Africa and Latin America until even after the fall of the Soviet Union. So a lot going on there. So what happens next? Well, this is where the big part of the story happens. All of that was just the lead up to 1962. The Soviet Union, knowing that there are nuclear missiles in Turkey that threaten them and are very, very close to the Soviet Union, send nuclear missiles in some empty silos and basically empty containers just to intimidate to Cuba. And the Americans get aerial footage of them in October in the summer of 1962. This Kennedy demands that Nikita Khrushchev remove the nuclear missiles from Cuba. Khrushchev refuses, and the Americans surround the island with a naval blockade. And basically, everybody has their finger over the trigger. The navies, the naval commanders, and the premier of the Soviet Union and the U.S. president, basically waiting to see which side will flinch first. Both sides know that this will cause mutually assured destruction, which is MAD, the huge doctrine of the Cold War, where basically both sides, if they decide to flip out on each other, will destroy not only the other side but themselves. And the Soviets and the Americans decide that self-preservation is better than dying. So they would rather preserve themselves and destroy their enemies if it meant that they would be destroyed as well. So eventually cooler heads prevail late in 1962. And Khrushchev takes out the missiles. Kennedy is hailed as a hero, and the U.S. removes its missiles from Turkey. and Soviet relations with the United States at an all-time low will start to boost back upwards throughout the 1960s and 70s until we get to the invasion of Afghanistan, and that's another turning point in the Cold War, as well as the election of US President Ronald Reagan. So the Cubans and the Soviets are going to remain close to each other, T-Love, and basically now Cuba is one of the few uh, indefatigable communist states left in the world. So hopefully that gave you a good explanation of all of that. And I've done an entire live stream series and a live stream lecture, and I've done many videos on US presidents, as well as check out my US presidents playlist and some of the videos coming out today in honor of President's Day. So, but yeah, done a lot of Cold War stuff on this channel, and it's always fun to talk about. Texas Repo, birthright citizenship is a hot topic right now. What do you know about the history of it, and what's your opinion on it? Thanks. Okay, all right, I'll talk about this. It's going to get a little political. I'm not trying to pick a side. I'm just going to talk about as much history as I know. The 14th Amendment was not originally intended to apply to immigrants. Hold on. Basically, at the end of the Civil War, they freed all of the Union Army had freed slaves all throughout the South, who were immediately granted their freedom, and slavery was abolished with the 13th Amendment in December of 1865. Now the question was, what are these slaves? They were born in America. Their grandparents were born in America. Their parents were born in America. They speak English. What are they? They're no longer property. They're no longer to ever be considered property, and they are not legal residents. They were born on American soil. So the 14th Amendment stipulates that the people born on American soil are indeed citizens, referring to the status of the slaves in case there was any question about their status. This allowed them to become citizens, own land, get educated, all of the things that were part of what's called Reconstruction, which was the effort of the Northerners, led by the radical Republicans in Congress and presidents like Ulysses S. Grant and Rutherford B. Hayes, to get as much civil rights as possible to African Americans. The free blacks gained economic opportunities, the ability to get educated from Northern schools and educators who were sent down, known as carpetbaggers. And basically, the South was rebuilt slowly but surely by an occupation that was a military occupation that preserved the rights of African Americans, because on the other side were raving, angry, hateful Confederates who wanted to quash black rights as soon as they possibly could. So the Union Army actually had to occupy the South throughout the 1860s and into the 1870s, even after the war ended. So the 14th Amendment basically ensured birthright citizenship because people born here were citizens, because all these slaves had been born here and were citizens. And this set up the 15th Amendment, which gave them the right to vote. So because of that, it's been reinterpreted by the Supreme Court and other courts, right of the soil and right of blood. Basically, if somebody is born here, they're a U.S. citizen, and if both parents of somebody born here are U.S. citizens, then they can become a U.S. citizen, or they are automatically a U.S. citizen. So that's J. Soleil and J. Sangrenet, the right of blood, the right of soil, and the right of blood, respectively. This was interpreted by the Supreme Court in the late 19th century. It wasn't supposed to apply to immigrants, but has been used for immigrants ever since that time period. Basically, this is a big debate within understanding law and the application of the U.S. Constitution. Does the original intent and writing matter at all? We don't know. And so that's the debate that is in jurisprudence that takes place within the Supreme Court and the federal court system between originalism and a more liberal interpretation of a constitution that I can't quite name right now. Whether the Constitution is a living document to be understood in a particular context and time, or whether we should follow it as it was originally put together. So birthright citizenship is obviously not just part of that debate. It's not black and white. It's now just fueled its way into the political debate, Texas. So I hope that gives a pretty good objective answer. I do talk about politics and geopolitics because it's all related to history. It's all impacted by history, but I try to keep as an objective and open a mind as I possibly can. And if you think that I'm doing a good job at that, then you might be an excellent candidate for being a friendly neighborhood historian. So consider liking and subscribing to the feed. Rishi, what are the cultural practices or norms that are shifting in the USA? This is something I talked about a little bit in the live stream yesterday, but basically we see the United States becoming far more secular, far more interested in environmental development rather than economic development. And you see a declining birth rates as a country becomes more wealthy sociologically. Fewer and fewer people actually give birth, and people get married at later ages, and they have smaller families, and so the birth rate is declining, religious attendance is declining. Many of these things are declining as people are becoming more prosperous, and basically life is starting later and later. There's a phenomenon amongst my generation and the generation before and after me where people don't get married until their 30s and have kids until their 30s, or at all. So people don't like to have children as much. They don't like to engage in religious activity. There is now a whole generation of Americans which are unchurched, meaning that they don't have a particular experience with religion and have never even heard any particular religious message, especially the Christian one, which has been the ostensible religion of the country for 2.5 centuries now. So that's quite fascinating to hear. Um, so religious attendance is at an all-time low. Uh, Social media usage is at an all-time high, and there is exponential technological development where basically technology has grown by leaps and bounds in the last 2 centuries from what it was in the previous 58 centuries before then, since the creation of human history in the late fifth century, in the late fifth millennium BCE. See, I sometimes use BCE and CE. But in the last 2 centuries, technological development, which has aided economic and medical development, has skyrocketed, and it's even skyrocketing more in the last 30 years. There were no iPhones, there was no text messages, there were barely cell phones 30 years ago. Now look at where we are. It's incredible what we can do. What I'm doing with you guys would not have been possible even 10 years ago. It's amazing where we have gone. So Rishi, those are a few things that are cultural practices: high technological development, concern about the environment instead of environmental development rather than economic development, renewable energy becoming such a huge factor, declining birth rates and declining marriage rates, people getting educated and developing a career later in life, and declining religious rates. So there's actually what people have called a prolonged adolescence, where people, because of economic costs such as high costs of tuition and high costs of housing and rentals, are living with their parents later and later in life and getting started later and later in life, and people can't afford to have children until later in life, and some of them just don't anyways. There's also the development of hookup culture, which has been made more accessible by technology again. Dating apps on the phone like Tinder and Grindr, which have basically allowed people of every different heterosexual or homosexual persuasion to engage in more anonymous sexual activity that has not been really pronounced in American history before. People had relations and did all sorts of things in or outside of wedlock for centuries, and many of them were straight and some of them were gay. But now it's far more, there's a far more open culture of basically sex on demand, with the rise of certain things that I can't necessarily name, but also you have the development of the glorification and normalization of commercial sex work and things like that, with things like OnlyFans and the like. So those are all examples, and that's part of a technological development, that's part of the economic development, and that's part of a moral change in status. These things would not have been permissible even 30 years ago. The culture has significantly changed. And there seems to be pushback from more conservative elements of society. The transgender movement has suffered some huge losses in the last few years and will continue to do so probably as long as Donald Trump is president, as long as the Republicans and conservative courts control large sections there. So these are cultural trends that have emerged. The Obrugefell decision, which legalized gay marriage in the entire United States, happened 10 years ago, believe it or not. However, it's only now that we're really starting to see and the transgender movement kind of took off from there. It has become extraordinarily huge. The whole debate about different genders and things like this and pronouns that have led to all sorts of cultural back and forth, men competing in women's sports if they are to be called men. All of that stuff has changed, has skyrocketed cultural explosion exponentially. And I think technology and technological access has a lot to do with it. Another cultural trend that's interesting that I noted watching this election and paying attention to both the social media and the regular mainstream old school news media and newspapers and PBS, CBS, ABC, NBC, all of that, is that people are now doing community media, social media, Facebook and X, where people can community note and do fact checking on their own. Independent fact checking fact checking from news sources is no longer recommended or necessary. People learn their own information and figure out their own truths, and that's just what's happening as the culture becomes more relativistic and as community media becomes more popular, where people rely on social media to learn information instead of traditional sources of media. So Rishi, that's a very long answer, and it's a complex question. It's a great question, and hopefully I gave a great answer to that. And see, I do cultural commentary and all sorts of things, and hopefully I'm doing it as objectively and fairly as I possibly can. I'm just identifying certain trends culturally that are happening in the US. They are also happening throughout the Western world as a point of order. So we are coming up on an hour of being here and everything. Yes, it's my pleasure. I'm happy to give an explanation. Hopefully, you've all been able to hear me. The audio's been good. The lighting's been good. We've had a really fun time today. I've really enjoyed all the questions and topics we've been able to get into. And when we have a smaller crowd like this, it's great because I get to actually go into detail and hear people out. And there's follow-up questions and all of that great stuff. And Texas Repo and Rishi and Angel and T Love and Rodolfo, you've had some great questions and everything. Please show some love to Rodolfo and to Matt, my moderators, who did a great job, and to M, who put in the social media handles even before I was here. And again, consider following me on those platforms. And if you want bonus content for donations and things like that, Patreon's a great place to see me. If you want to read what I write, to look at Substack, and there's also Facebook and Instagram and Twitter where I post stuff as well. And of course, like and subscribe, and that's how you become a friendly neighborhood historian. Thank you for a really good Q&A, a special one, a fun one, a historical one for a historic day, President's Day. Enjoy the rest of your Monday and the rest of your week. We will be back Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for 2 hours of Q&A, making up for our delay because of some family issues I've been going through. It's been a rough first couple of months of 2025 for me, but this channel is such a fun and exciting presence in my life. It's always a pleasure. And Angel, thank you for showing them some love. That's very sweet of you. I will do last call like I always do. Does anyone have any last comments, questions, or topics related to social studies that they would like me to answer in the chat? If not, please like, subscribe, and we will see you again on Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for 2-hour Q&A. Really looking forward to that. But does anyone have any topics they would like to bring up? Going once. I need some water. I've been going like a machine gun. I am trying to pace. I know I talk fast sometimes. I am trying to pace myself and talk a little slower. I'm doing the best I can with that. That's a slow but steady process, and it's not going to happen overnight. A lot of the times, people have said it's just I have so much information. I'm trying to get as much of it out as I possibly can, and but I'm trying to be more measured, enunciate more, not throw things together in like a regurgitation. So hopefully I'm doing better with that, and hopefully the audio was good because I'm going to keep this kind of microphone set up so I can use my hands to motion and do stuff like that. But thank you all for a very, very good live stream, going twice. Any last comments, questions, or concerns? If you want to ask me more in-depth stuff, if you want to discuss things a little bit more, or you want to push back on some of my ideas, email me, friendlyneighborhoodhistory1@gmail.com, or it's friendlyneighborhoodhistory@gmail.com. Very, very simple, very bland stuff. And Rodolfo, I think you've got the last call. What's going on? What can I do for you? And if you want to see the social media handles and you haven't seen them in the chat, they are on my YouTube page, so check that out. And join us 5 p.m. My video drops 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. My video drops on the presidents. So really looking forward to everyone watching that. I'd say one good thing and one bad thing about each U.S. president. Next time is Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Saturday, 7 p.m. Eastern, or Saturday, I think we're going to do like early, like 1 p.m. or 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so early afternoon. And then Sunday, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the live stream lecture. No worries, Rodolfo. I'm just glad you're here. Thank you so much. Neurodivergence is welcome here at the channel. Anyone's welcome to this channel anytime, as long as they do what I always suggest and what is my always sign off, which I will leave you with right now. Take care. Have a great week. And remember, love history. Bye-bye now.